guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to make this ear warmer here, and on this one here I just used the same yarn for both the center and the main piece. We make these separately. In the other ones, as you can see in the picture, in one of those I actually did the center a different color, so you can do whatever you would like to do. It's completely up to you. And I will insert a picture right now that shows the yarn that I used for both this one and the other two seen in the picture, just because I don't have any left. So I'll insert that information now, just so you know what I used for it. But you do not even need to use a bulky 5 weight, because I do tell you in the video how to kind of size it to your own head. You could actually use a smaller hook or a bigger hook or smaller yarn or whatever works for you. But I did like to use the bigger yarn because I wanted to make these up super quick. So I actually was able to make this up in under an hour. So that's always nice when you can make a project up super quick. Aside from the yarn, I'll get that out of the way. I also used a 8mm crochet hook, a needle to sew in my ends, a pair of scissors, and I used a measuring tape just to figure out my beginning chain amount. But if you do not have a measuring tape, that's completely fine. In the following clip, you will see how to properly measure it to your head if you don't have one, or you can use one, completely up to you. But otherwise, you will need these 3 items and the yarn. And with that, we can go ahead and get into making this super fast, super easy as well, ear warmer. To get started, what I did was measured around my head exactly where I wanted the ear warmer to sit. So what I mean by that is I started at the top of my head, went down around my ears, around my neck, up the other side of my head, over my ears, and to the top of my head again. And that measurement for me was 22.5 inches. So at this point, I want to make up a chain, and after I complete that chain, I'm going to give it a good stretch, and I want it to come to 4 inches less than that measurement of 22.5 inches. And you will see this a little bit better once I have the chain built up. I'll show you exactly how I did that. If you do not have a measuring tape, no need to worry about that. You can just build up a chain and hold it around your head exactly where you want it to sit, but you have to make sure when the ends touch that it's stretched. So you're stretching to get it to touch. So you could start the chain at the top of your head, holding it there and around where I just mentioned, and then the stretch chain will meet at the top of your head. Just because it's going to stretch out over time, you don't want it to sit, you don't want the chain unstretched to sit perfectly, just because it'll end up being too loose on you. So again, I will show you this a little bit better in the next clip. But for me, I'm going to start with a slip knot on my hook. And I'm going to chain 53. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm just going to keep working up this chain until I have a total of 53 chains, and then I will come back on and we'll talk a little bit more about how that measurement worked for me, just so you can size it for yourself or whoever you're making it for. All right, I have my chain of 53 complete, and what I'm going to do at this point is just give it a good stretch. And if you do not have a tape measure, at this point, you can just wrap this around your head and make sure that it stretches all the way around and sits where you'd like it to sit with the ends meeting. But once again, make sure that you're stretching it around, because it will get looser as time goes on. So for me, I did actually use a tape measure, and like I mentioned, that measurement comes to 22.5 inches, and I just want to make sure that the stretch band comes to 4 inches less than that measurement. And you can go ahead and do it like this as well. So yeah, it comes to right to 18.5 inches, and that's not me stretching it at all. So I know that that will work good for me. You can also just make sure that the unstretched band will stretch out to that measurement, which mine does. So at this point, I'll get this tape measure out of the way. I'm going to slip stitch to the first chain that I made, making sure not to twist my chain. So I will just follow it down. And into that first chain we made, we're just going to slip stitch into it. So you put your hook through that chain and pull the yarn both through that chain and the loop on your hook. So we just slip stitched the ends together. And at this point, we're actually going to work in rounds. So I'm going to double crochet into every chain around. So I'll start by chaining 1, and I'm going to go back right into that chain that I just slip stitched into and put a double crochet. That chain 1 that we made does not count as a stitch. So I did a double crochet into that first chain, and I'm just going to work my way around. I'm actually going to work over this tail so I don't have to sew it in later, but you do not have to do that. I'm just going to work my way around, putting 1 double crochet into every single chain around. And since I have 53 chains, I should have 53 double crochets all the way around. So when you make your way around, just make sure that you end up with the same number of double crochets as the number of chains that you made. So I'm just going to keep working 1 double crochet into every single chain, and when I've made my way back over to this side, I'll come back on and we'll go on to round 2 together. All right, I'm just coming to the end of round 1 here. I have 1 more double crochet to do, and sometimes it can be kind of tricky to see where to put your hook at the end there. So if you're having troubles, just make sure you count all of the double crochets around. And I will have 53 after completing this final one, but that's kind of the easiest way to know if you need to do another one, or if you're at the slip stitch, or you're just a little bit confused with the end here of whether or not to do another double crochet. So I'm going to do my final one, and I'm going to slip stitch to the first double crochet of the round. So not this chain 1 that we did, but the first double crochet of the round. I will just slip stitch right into that. And again, I'm going to chain 1. That chain 1 does not count as a stitch. I'm going to go right back into that stitch I just slip stitched into and do a double crochet. And once again, I'm just going to work my way around, putting 1 double crochet into every stitch all the way around. So once I've made my way around and I'm back over at this side, I will come back on again and we'll go on to round 3. I just have 1 stitch to go here for round 2. And make sure you're not confusing this little space right here as a stitch. That's just the slip stitch from the previous row. So we're not going to go into there with a stitch. It's the slip stitch and then that chain 1. But once again, I'll have 53 double crochets around. So I'm going to slip stitch to that first double crochet of the round once again, and chain 1. And all I'm going to do here is just repeat row 2, and I'm going to repeat it for round 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I will have 7 rounds total on this headband, but feel free to make it as wide or as thin as you'd like it to be in order to comfortably fit over your ears. But once again, I'm just going to go right back into that stitch that I just slip stitched into with a double crochet and just double crochet my way around. So I'm on round 3 here, and when I complete round 3, I will just slip stitch to the first stitch of the round, chain 1, do another round of double crochets until I have 7 rounds total. And don't worry if you start to see a seam here, because eventually that center piece will cover it. You won't see it at all. So that's why I'm not working in the round and I'm doing the slip stitch, just because I find it a little bit easier, and you won't even see that seam once the ear warmer is all complete. So you work up rounds of double crochets until your main piece is as wide as you'd like it to be, but I'll otherwise see you at the end of round 7. All right, I'm just coming to the end of round 7 here. I just have the final 2 double crochets to complete. And again, I will slip stitch to that first double crochet of that round and chain 1. And at this point, I will measure it just in case you'd like to do more or less rounds to get it to the same width, but feel free to make it as wide as you would like. Whatever works for you is fine. So mine is right about 4.5 inches wide. But again, feel free to do as many or as little rounds as you'd like. So at this point, I'm just going to do a round of single crochets. So again, I slip stitch to that stitch, I chained 1, and I'm going to go back into that same stitch with a single crochet. And I'm just going to work my way around for round 8 with a single crochet into every stitch. And as soon as I've made my way around, I'll come back on and we're going to clean up this bottom edge with single crochets as well, but I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, I've made my way around with single crochets and I still have 53 single crochets around. So we're going to fasten off by slip stitching to that first single crochet we made on round 8 or whatever round you're on. And I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to cut my yarn and pull that yarn through and pull tight to fasten off. And I will get that sewn in just a little bit. So at this point, I'm going to flip my headband around and we're going to do a round of single crochets on this opposite side here. So this is the chain we originally worked in and we're just going to clean that up. So you can attach your yarn in any stitch here. I'm just going to attach it to that stitch to the left of the seam, that first loop there. And I will bring in my yarn and pull that through and chain 1. And I'm just going to go ahead and work over this tail just so I don't have to sew it in later. And I'm going to go back into that same chain I just attached the yarn to and single crochet into it. And I'm just going to work my way around, putting 1 single crochet into each one of those stitches. And just like the opposite side that you just completed, just make sure you have that same number. So for me, I'm going to make sure I have 53 single crochets around here. just so it's on the same, with the same on each side. So I'm just going to work my way around with a round of single crochets and making sure that we're working in this direction, just so the front of the single crochets is showing here and the front of the single crochets will be showing here. So as soon as I've made my way around with those single crochets and I'm back here, I'll come back on and we'll go on to the next step together. So I just finished up my final single crochet of this round, and I went ahead and counted and made sure that I had 53 all the way around. So I'm going to again slip stitch to that first single crochet of the round, like so, and I'm going to chain one, and again I'm going to cut my yarn and fasten off, because at this point we're going to work on that center piece that will eventually wrap around this and slip stitch it together. So once again, I will pull that yarn through and pull tight, and we're all fastened off. So, and again, I will sew these in a little bit. So I'm going to get this piece out of the way, and I'm going to bring in my yarn again, and we're going to work up that piece that will wrap around the center. So to do that, again, we start with a slip knot on our hook, and I'm going to chain 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And if you'd like the centerpiece to be a little bit thinner, go ahead and only chain up 7 or even less. And if you'd like it to be thicker, go ahead and chain up a little bit more. But I do think this number will work no matter the size that you've made up this far. So from here, I'm going to single crochet into that second chain from the hook. So remember that loop on your hook doesn't count as anything. We count back 1 and 2, and into that second chain, we're going to do a single crochet. And I'm just going to work my way along the chain, putting 1 single crochet into each chain. And I'll just stay on here because I'm almost at this end already. So I just have 1 more to go. I'll single crochet into that final chain, and I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and I'm just going to do 10 rows total of single crochets. So we'll go right into that first stitch there with a single crochet and work my way across, putting 1 single crochet into every stitch. And when you make it to the end of a row, so when I make it down here and do my final single crochet into that final stitch, I'll chain 1, turn my work, and I'm just going to carry on working up 10 rows total of these single crochets. All right, I just finished up row 10, and I will measure it in case you want to get it to the same. So it's just under 3.5 inches. I would say it's about a 3.25 inches. And I knew that that was the right amount. If I bring in this big piece here, it's going to seem very, very small, but if I scrunch up the middle of my piece, I can just get the sides to touch, and that's kind of pulling it. So I knew that was the right size. So you can go ahead and do more or less rows to get yours to just touch, and that's kind of pulling and stretching it around your big piece. So at this point, I'm going to chain 1, and we're going to work around this entire piece here with single crochets. So we're just going to clean up this side, work around here, clean up this opposite side, and also this top side. So to do that, it's just kind of wherever your hook fits, because there's not specific stitches down this side, it's not going to be super easy to see where to put your hook, but I like to do 1 single crochet per row. So I had 10 rows here. I want to make sure I have 10 single crochets going down this row. And sometimes if you tug your work here, you can kind of see good spaces to go into. So I'll go into my first one here with a single crochet and just work my way down. Again, I kind of move the work around. There's a space. I'll go into there with a single crochet. Single crochet, and I'm just going to work my way down this edge with single crochets. Again, making sure to do 1 single crochet per row. And as soon as I've made it down to this side, I'll come back on and I'll show you how to work around this corner here. All right, I'm down at this side here. This was my 9th single crochet. And in this very corner stitch here, which will actually be your beginning chain, I'm going to do, this will be my 10th single crochet of this side. I'm going to go into it with a single crochet right into that stitch, a chain 1, and another single crochet into that same stitch. So that kind of helped us work around that corner, and now we're looking at this side here. And this side, it'll be more obvious stitches you go into. So you're just going to work your way across, putting 1 single crochet into each one of those stitches. And once again, just have 1 more to go here. I'm at that corner stitch again, so I'm going to do the same that I just did at this corner. I'm going to go right into that stitch with a single crochet, a chain 1, and a single crochet right back into that same stitch. And again, that's kind of worked us around to work up this side. So I'm just going to do the same thing of working up this side, and I will work over this strand of yarn as I go so I don't have to sew it in later, with a single crochet into the end of each of these rows here. Just into kind of any space where your hook will fit. This part does not need to be perfect. So I'm going to work my way across here, and once again in that corner stitch I will do a single crochet, chain 1, single crochet into that same stitch, and work my way back over here. And when I've made my way over to this corner where we started, I will come back on and we'll get this wrapped around that headband together. I do also want to mention that it's not important if the number of single crochets down the side add up. It is important that you're making sure that the single crochets at each of these ends, that it's an equal number of single crochets, because eventually we will be slip stitching these end stitches together. So I hope that makes sense, and when I've made my way over here, I'll come back on and we'll get this wrapped around our main piece. All right, I'm just about back where I started here. I have 1 stitch remaining, and you can tell because it's right before that first chain we made. So I will go into that final stitch with a single crochet, and I'm going to slip stitch right into that chain space, and you may have to kind of wiggle your hook a little bit to get into there, but I'm just going to go right into that chain space. There we go, with a slip stitch. And I will chain 1. And at this point, I'm just going to get this out of the way. And you do want to make sure at this point, because we're going to get this smaller piece wrapped around this center seam, if you still have tails here, like I do, go ahead and get those all sewn in. So I'm going to do that off camera right now. I'll get all of these tails sewn in, and then we will get this piece here wrapped around your big piece. I just did a super easy sew job because you're not going to see this center seam because that middle piece will eventually cover it all. I just kind of went down and hid my tails in this portion because that will be completely covered up and you will never see it. So I just did the easy sew job, but you do whatever works for you. So at this point, we're going to bring in our small piece, and I'm actually going to turn my big piece inside out. So I'm looking at the wrong side of it. And what I want to do is sew the smaller piece around it with the wrong side of it showing. You can see you're looking at the back of that row of single crochets you did. You want to make sure it's sewn like this, and then eventually we'll turn it right side out just so you will not see the seam of this when we slip stitch it together. So, and because I'm going to sew this together, I'm going to cut my yarn here, leaving a good amount of tail to sew up those ends around this main piece. So I will, that should be more than enough, cut my yarn, and I will pull that through and pull tight to fasten off. So we're looking at the wrong side of our main piece, and I'm looking at the right side of this center piece here, and I'm going to put it right through the top here. And I'm going to kind of gather up the middle part of our main piece and wrap the smaller piece around it. And again, we're going to be sewing up these ends. So I'm going to actually turn my work at this point, just so I'm looking at it from the right way so we can sew this way. And feel free to actually slip stitch this together. You could just insert your hook and do slip stitches along here. I am going to sew it. So I will bring in my yarn needle here, and I'll get it attached onto this tail. Like so. All right, so we have that middle gathered in the center here of this smaller piece, and starting on this right side, I'm actually going to go back through the spot we just slip stitched into. So that was that chain space that we slip stitched into. I'm going to go right through the center of that chain space and through the center of the chain space over on the opposite side. So you can tell where that chain space is, because you remember in that corner stitch we did the single crochet, chain one, single crochet. So it's going to be that stitch that's right in the middle. You'll have your single crochet, your chain space, and your single crochet. So I'm going to go right through that chain space over on this side. So I've worked right through the center of both of those chain spaces, and that's going to attach them. And then I'm going to come back over to this front side, and I'm going to go into the next stitch over on this right side. So remember, there's that chain space. We're going to go right through the next available stitch. So both loops are on your hook on this front side. Oops, let's make sure my yarn doesn't get all tangled up here. There we go. And go through the center of the next available stitch on this back side. Like so. And now I've attached those next two stitches together. And this is actually whip stitching it. So again, I will come back to the next stitch over on this front side, going through both of those loops, catching that entire stitch, and the next stitch over on this side, catching both of those loops, and stitch those two together. And I'm just going to work my way along here, stitching those two sides together. So grabbing this next stitch over on this front side and the next stitch over on this side, like so, and stitching it. Great, I have one more stitch remaining on each side prior to that chain. You'll know it's that final actual stitch because then there's that chain and the stitch on the opposite side. So I have one more on each side, and it should work out that you have an equal number on both sides. So you can see I have one there right prior to that chain. So I'll stitch those final two stitches together, but then I'm also going to come back and go through that chain space as well, just like I did over on this side. So I'll go right through the chain space over on this side and right through that chain space over on that side, like so. And I'm actually going to go through it again because I am sewing it. I'm going to go back through with a knot. If you are slip stitching it, just do the chain one, cut your yarn, pull that yarn through and pull tight to fasten off. But I'm actually going to go through these two stitches again with a knot just to make sure that this does not come unraveled. So I just went through it again, and then I will come back through that loop and pull, and that's going to tie a knot like so. And again, I will get this sewn in just a second, but at this point you can turn your main piece right side out, and remember we were sewing it looking at the wrong side, so we're also going to turn this center piece inside out, but you can kind of start to see what it's looking like. I will, and this part can be a little bit tricky because it's so tight, but you want it to fit tight around there. So just do your best, kind of turn that right side out, wiggle it around until it's sitting where you'd like it to. So I'm just going to go off camera here for a moment, and you can pause the video at this point and get yours all situated as well. And as soon as I'm done that, I will come back on and we'll get these ends sewn in together and look at our ear warmer together. So when you have it sitting kind of where you'd like, I was just kind of pulling at the edges a little bit and just getting it sitting exactly where I'd like it. I'm going to sew in this end, so I'm actually going to turn this inside out again. And the way that I like to sew it in, just so the center piece is never moving, you can reattach your yarn to the yarn needle, and all I'm going to do is, while sewing in this end, I'm actually going to focus going around the edges here, so, and making sure to kind of catch both those pieces. So what I mean by that is I will just kind of go, you know, anywhere along the edge. This part doesn't need to be perfect, and just make sure to kind of catch a piece underneath, or you could even go right through to the other side, which I'm doing now, like so, and then coming from this front side to the back side, so I'll kind of skip over to this next stitch somewhere around the edge, going right through to the back side, and repeating that way. And I'm doing this just to make sure this centerpiece doesn't wiggle about on the headband. So you can go ahead and sew this in. If that doesn't work out, that's completely fine. You can leave it. I mean, it's pretty snug around there, so chances are it's not going anywhere, or you could put a little bit of fabric glue right in the middle, whatever works for you. But I'm just going to kind of work my way around, focusing in on those edges, and then I'll move my yarn over to this side and do the same around this edge. But you do whatever works best for you. Again, if this part's a little too tricky, you can just leave it as is. You saw how it looked when we first flipped it over, and it looks really nice and it's snug around there. So whatever works best for you, that will be completely fine. And when I'm all done that, I will come back on and we'll look at our final headband together. All right, I got all my ends sewn in and I flipped it right side out again, and our headband is all complete. And I really hope that you're happy with how yours ended up and it fits you good, and you didn't have too many problems with it. I'm super happy with how this came out. I've made up a couple now. I love them. So I hope you're happy with yours, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!